What's up, Ego Hackers? Welcome to Season 12, Part 2. This is Episode 14, Social Skills for the ISFP Archetype. I love the ISFP archetype. I'm actually standing right here next to the ISFP tree in downtown Coeur d'Alene. Really enjoy ISFPs. I had the pleasure of marrying one recently. My Chris knife. I love her with all of my heart. Entirely. I love her with all my heart. And in my life, she has a really good social head on her shoulders. I am consistently impressed by her social mastery and how she conducts herself in social situations, conducts herself with people closest to her in her life and the people that she cares about, always making others a priority. It's absolutely stunning. It's absolutely amazing. Her, and I am consistently wowed and in awe of how she behaves, while simultaneously dying of cute, naturally. I do. This episode is dedicated to my dear wife, Chris Knife, as a result. So the ISFP archetype. Everyone has problems developing social skills. Everybody does. Sometimes it's a little bit more subtle and actually harder to detect with ISFPs than the other 16 types. Can be because, they're so behind the scenes, they're so sweet, they're so moral, they care very much about their reputation and sometimes the reputation of other people. They sometimes worry about other people's feelings because they're so aware of how they themselves are feeling. But because they're so aware of how they themselves are feeling, they are oftentimes projecting how they feel and projecting their moods and projecting their values onto others on a regular basis. To the point where oftentimes the TI demon makes the assumption that other people value things the same way, or find what they find valuable to be the same for other people. And I've noticed that oftentimes ISFPs pick their friends based on a shared value system. The reason why is because they worry about their values not being accepted through extroverted feeling nemesis. And they oftentimes choose friends that already have the same shared values that they have. And because of that, it actually can stunt their growth to the point where they can be kind of bullheaded with their values. I actually had the pleasure of working with an ISFP man who was my shop manager back when I was an arms manufacturer. And he had this thing that when he would he'd build guns for me, beautiful weapons. But he had this thing where he would piss off my customers a lot. Why? How? Because the customer wants the same outcome every single time. They come to me and they want to buy a shotgun. It costs us about $900 a unit to make, and we sell them for $3,000 each. And they loved them. They absolutely, customers were raving about these weapons and all the customizations, our entire shop process that we developed, manufacturing these weapons and selling them to our customers. We sell them at gun shows. We sell them to the Seattle Police Department for their riot gear in those days. Fantastic weapons. The thing is that my ISFP shop manager would be consistently adding his own modifications to each individual weapon, such that each individual weapon that he worked on and he oversaw, that he produced right off of our assembly line, would have different modifications. So we'd have customers, there'd be a group of customers that would come in and they would buy, they'd buy these Kushner-Pup shotguns that we manufactured for them. But for some reason, each individual shotgun was slightly different and had a different set of modifications. And this would create envy and jealousy between our customers, because they'd be like, well, wait a minute, how come that person has that modification and I don't have that modification? Or the other guy would be like, well, how come this guy also has this other modification, but I don't have that modification on my weapon? this basically is one of the contributing factors as to why my arms business went down in flames, because we weren't able to have a consistently produced weapon system that we would be offering to our clients. And oftentimes we'd have clients sending in their weapons to be fixed, because it's like, hey, mine's missing a modification. And then I'd have my shop manager end up having to redo our entire manufacturing process that we've already set up, our own standard operating procedure, to add modifications that were not already existing in our standard operating procedure. And that, of course, because the customer's always right? The customer's always right. And with that, we'd have no choice but to take these women's weapons back, and I'd have to spend more shop time, more shop resources, more tools, and the expenses went up, and to the point where we weren't even actually making a profit on the weapons that we were selling, because we'd have so many of them sent back because of these so-called missing modifications that were added to these weapon systems that are not even actually original to our standard operating procedure. It got to the point where we had to update our standard operating procedure so many times to take on all these new modifications that were being added by my ISFP shop manager. His name is Justin. Really great guy. Really moral fellow. I loved that man. I absolutely love him. But that's not how to conduct business. We have a standard for a reason. And he would consistently pour his own creativity and break our standard on a regular basis, that it would create these problems with these customers. And it absolutely brought the company to its knees. It absolutely did. We ran out of money. Had this not happened, we would have had enough money actually to switch from manufacturing the Russian parts to the Chinese parts, and we could have developed and did some R&D and developed conversion kits for weapon systems based on the Chinese Kalashnikov platform. And we would have had to, because the business went down in flames. Why? Because the Russians invaded Crimea. When this happened, President Obama put an embargo where I could no longer import Russian parts. But because I didn't have any money to be able to order the Chinese parts and do the R&D necessary for us to change our manufacturing process over to the Chinese parts, we ended up losing the company. I remember the day. It was October 1st, 2014. I show up to the shop. I call a meeting for all of our employees consistently. All of them. I bring them in and had them all line up. And I remember telling them, you're all fired, including me. These guys were depending on their jobs and their income because Thanksgiving was around the corner, Christmas was around the corner, and I ended up having to lay them off. I laid them all off. I also told them, hey, guess what? I'm fired too because we're closing the company. So my gun business no longer existed. Gone. Over with. Gone. Yeah, sure, the buck stops with me. I should have been a better manager. I should have held that ISFP accountable. I shouldn't have given him as much freedom, because his NI was cognitive looping with introverted feeling hero consistently. I want to do this thing that I value. I want to do this thing that I value. I want to add this new modification that I researched to make the weapon system better. But the problem with that is that it cost so much money, caused so much customer confusion, that it put us out of business. It absolutely put us out of business. It even got to the point where my shop manager was actually driving out to customers' homes and in their own garages or their own shops, actually adding modifications to their weapon systems for them. And that cost way too much. Couldn't do it. So we ended up losing the company as a result. This is just one real-life example of an ISFP projecting what they value onto everybody else around them. And he was projecting what he valued onto the company and everyone else in terms of what we were doing. Because TI demon is making the assumption that everyone else values what they value. And that's basically akin to an ISFP projecting their own value system onto others. We talk about how ISFJs are forcing their comfort zone down the throats of other people. Well, this is a situation where the extroverted sensing parent, which is a teenager and not actually a responsible parent, is forcing other people to adopt what they value. We had many customers complain saying, I don't value this modification, but here it is on the weapon system that I bought. This is not what I wanted to buy. We had to process so many returns because of this loose cannon of an ISFP. It was rough. It was really rough. Imagine how that applies to social situations with any ISFP, where in friend groups, the ISFP ends up subtly, over time, usurping the entire value system of the friend group and expecting other people to value what they value. This is wrong. This actually pushes other people away. We always talk about how there's a little bit of the demon inside of the hero, where the demon is like, well, I'm really pompous and I'm very prideful in my work and I know best. And because I know best, everyone should value these modifications. Everyone should value what I value, right? When the reality of the situation is, they don't. The ISFP has to recognize that their own personal value system is their own value system. What they feel is a good thing is literally only something that they feel is a good thing. And oftentimes, ISFPs will not allow themselves to have relationships or friendships with other people who have different value systems. This is especially bad with ISFP men. It's really bad with ISFP men because they're constantly pushing their value systems on other friends that they have to the point where the friends don't really want to do anything anymore. It's also to the point where ISFP men oftentimes actually reject friends over time because those friends are not adopting their value system. And they're consistently worried with their extroverted feeling nemesis that those people do not value the same things that they value, so they often choose with their NI child to not be around those people, to not be friends with those people. And it ends up becoming this big problem over time, right? So because of that, it just creates problem after problem after problem. But here's the concrete result. The ISFP will end up rejecting those friends. The ISFP will end up pushing away those friends, pushing away those family members, pushing away those relationships because they have this expectation that other people will adopt their value system. This is also especially painful from a religious perspective. I don't know how many times I have seen religious ISFPs expecting other people who are not as religious as they are to just arbitrarily decide to reject people because they don't believe the same thing they believe. Because honestly, TE inferior, extroverted thinking inferior, is afraid of other people not thinking highly of what they themselves value. They're afraid of that. And to protect themselves from that fear, instead of aspiring through that fear, and actually being willing to utilize their ENTJ subconscious to actually experiment with, or at least use their extroverted sensing like a little kid and see what other people value and see what other people think and notice how other people act in their own value systems. You know, it's possible that other people's value systems may actually be more relevant than that of the ISFP. ISFPs have this problem consistently, where when they're taking in information, they'll take in the opinions of other people, they'll take in the thoughts of others, just so long as it matches what they already value. They want to find confirmation from other people of what they value. And if they don't get that confirmation from other people that what they value is what they value through this projection of their value system onto others, it ends up creating a huge problem to the point where they are alone. And the ISFP entirely is unaware and not conscious of why other people are not interested in spending time with them, are not interested in doing things with them, are not interested in performing activities with them and having shared activities. And it's because they're just afraid. They're afraid of their values not being confirmed or shared with other people up front, which is prideful, it is arrogant, it is hubris, it is pure TI demon hubris. And it happens over and over and over. Just because you value it does not mean everyone else should. Why does this happen? Extroverted intuition trickster. My shop manager, for example, he has this thing where he thinks about other people, and he automatically assumes, hey, I would want this modification, because I value this modification, so automatically you're going to want this modification. Automatically you're going to value this modification. And it's just a cognitive loop. It's NI child mixing in with FI hero, and then because of that, they assume with their TI demon that they're correct, and that it is the truth. And it is the truth that everybody else wants this. Their trickster ends up creating a social faux pas. NI child is so innocent. It is so innocent with what it wants that oftentimes expert intuition trickster assumes that everyone else has NI child through cognitive orbit, and everyone else is going to want the same things they want. The reality of the situation is that is almost never actually true. It's almost never true, okay? And they have to realize this. They have to realize this. Just because they value it, just because they want it, does not mean other people want it. Does not mean they should use their extroverted sensing parent in a teenager irresponsible mode and be irresponsible with the experience that they deliver to other people. Because what happens is that their performance goes down. The ISFP performance ends up degrading. It ends up deteriorating because TI demon gets into play where they're making the assumption that the best way they can perform is based on the value system and the desires that they have themselves and are projecting it onto other people on a regular basis. This is fundamentally wrong. It is very alienating. And their TI demon ends up alienating others because they start pretending. They pretend that they know best. They pretend that other people actually want this because they're too scared to find out with their extroverted thinking inferior if this what other people think. It happens all the time. They're too scared. They don't even want to ask the question. They don't even want to qualify whether or not other people desire something. They don't want to qualify whether or not other people value what they value. Why? Because that extroverted thinking inferior is afraid of criticism. So they end up oftentimes making the decision for other people like my shop manager did. And he took everyone else down with him in the process. Insanely frustrating. It was because, in part because of my shop manager's decisions, ultimately it was my poor management, but it was in part due to his poor decision making and his poor use of his extroverted sensing parent that he lost his job and I ended up homeless for the third time in my life. I ended up homeless. And I was homeless. Homeless where I had to social engineer my way into becoming an engineer for a hospital conglomerate in California where I had no actual qualifications as an engineer. And I had to lie through my teeth. But luckily, I learned very quickly, and I was able to study their technologies that they had very quickly and literally become an engineer overnight and deliver a good engineering experience to this hospital that gave me a chance when I was homeless. And then I became no longer homeless, and I'm very thankful for that opportunity in my life. I would not be here right now doing what I love without that experience. But things could have gone so much better had I managed this ISFP properly, had I also, this ISFP not been projecting what he wants and what he values onto other people with his extrovert intuition trickster or his TI demon. This is insanely alienating. This is how TI demon alienates everybody else around them. It's really sad, and it happens over and over. It's especially bad with ISFP men, especially bad, because they'll get to the point where they will actually choose to become lonely and choose to alienate themselves away from everybody else. People who do not actually accept what they value because of their effie nemesis, and they're worried that other people don't value what they value. They're afraid that other people do not think highly of what they value or think highly of what they would want. So instead of actually qualifying, they just run away. They run away from the truth. They run away from the truth that other people hold. They run away from the criticism. My shop manager did not want to be criticized at all. And he'd get extra diligent, driving to other people's houses, like I said, to fix these weapon systems. But the thing is that these decisions led to really bad consequences, where he put the company in danger, and other people ended up suffering as a result. Huge suffering. Okay, where I had to work very hard to get all those men rehired so that they could still feed their families, but also actually have Thanksgiving and Christmas. And instead of taking care of my own family, I find myself taking care of their families at my own expense and helping these men get jobs while I was homeless. It was a very rough time in my life. It was the time where social engineering was all I had, and I had to social engineer my way to survive. I had to social engineer it, all because of this ISFP in my life and my inability to manage him because I was young and stupid, to be fair. So what's the solution? What is the key to having social skills for an ISFP? Well, the answer is extroverted sensing parent, being responsible. There's a reason why standards exist. There's a reason why people want to receive the same experience over and over and over. There's a reason why ENTJs, for example, are so successful in business, because ENTJs are trying to create the same exact customer experience for every single customer. Every single widget they produce is supposed to be up to spec. It's supposed to be up to snuff, so that every customer has the opportunity to enjoy their widget. And it's the same widget. Because what is produced is supposed to be the same. It's really hard for an ISFP to have a really good legacy if they're being wishy-washy about what they make. Sure, I understand, if you're an ISFP painter, obviously there's going to be a different painter, and I know that when it comes to your work, ISFPs, it is ultimately an art. It is ultimately a craft. But you should not be experimenting and sharpening your craft on your customers. You should be doing it for yourself. And slowly over time, updating the experience that you deliver so that your customer isn't shell-shocked, so that your customer doesn't get sticker shock, so that your customer is able to have their expectations met. Oftentimes, ISFPs utilize their SI critic from the perspective of their own expectations, and their own expectations are sharpened by what they value and ultimately what they want. The problem is, though, is that they end up forcing their own expectations on other people, because the introverted feeling and introverted intuition cognitive loop ends up becoming an expectation that they have for themselves, and then they force that expectation under everyone else's throat, and expecting other people to be happy with a different widget produced each individual time. This is not going to work. Then, as an example of extroverted sensing parent, there is my dear wife. My dear wife who I love with all my heart. She's very, very keenly aware of other people's expectations. Very, very keenly aware of the experience they would like to receive. She's very outward from that perspective. And oftentimes I have seen her go out of her way for her family, especially, her immediate family especially, and also people at her church, in terms of navigating these people's expectations. And to the point of even having to adjust herself to their expectations and the experience that they are trying to receive. Now, naturally, you have to get a point in your life as an ISFP where you have to make the decision based on what makes you happy versus your reputation. Sometimes as an ISFP, you have to be willing to sacrifice your reputation, your TE inferior, in exchange for what it is you actually want with your NI child. It's very noble when an ISFP is willing to do this, and that's what she did. But in each individual instance, with each individual person in her life, she made sure that their experience and how she acted ultimately made them comfortable in such a way while she exercised her own personal freedom. She allowed her extroverted sensing parent to lead her own NI child as well as her introverted feeling hero to stop the cognitive loop and become very aware of the comfort of the people around her based on the decisions that she makes as an adult and as a woman. She does this for me all the time. Often the point of considering the validity of my own value system and what pieces of my value system are relevant to her and also relevant to others. And that way her value system is able to be shaped over time. And her desires are able to be shaped over time by how she is able to perform in meeting the expectations of other people around her. So if you're an ISFP in a social situation with friends, family, etc., find out. Find out what other people think. Find out what they actually value. Find out what their expectations are. Don't project your value system onto others. Don't project your choices onto other people, right? And instead, find out exactly how you can perform to meet their expectations. And then over time, once you've gained that rapport with people, once you have that pre-established rapport, then you can offer updates to their value system. Then you can offer updates to their freedom of choice by just being an example to other people, by being an example to your loved ones, by being an example to your friends. Instead of expecting them to behave like you, instead of expecting them to accept these so-called modifications, if you as an ISFP generate rapport with other people socially because you're meeting the baseline expectations that they already expect from this perspective, right, with your extroverted sensing parent, because you're doing that ahead of time, because you're doing that ahead of time, what's going to end up happening is that those people will actually come to you and ask for modifications. Ask for your value system. Ask you to share your value system. Ask you if you would make decisions, if you would exercise your personal freedom from their perspective, and if they should act pragmatically like you do. It just takes a long time. And our child sometimes wants to skip to the end, it wants to skip to the outcome, and it wants to deliver the complete experience and all of the individual modifications thereof. Think about it. From a business perspective, if the shop manager would just release our flagship product, the Kushna Pup, and it was always the same for every customer, we could have offered those modifications as separate products where they could actually bring in their weapon and have it modified specifically to what they wanted. And then each of those weapons could be customized under the freedom of the choice of the customer themselves, instead of having their freedom of choice being taken away from them. This is where ISFPs end up becoming controlling. And this is why oftentimes they find themselves lonely in their lives, by choice or otherwise, maybe not by choice, because they become very controlling and taking other people's freedom of choice away. Imagine buying a weapon system and having all these additional modifications you didn't ask for. That could be really infuriating. But then imagine buying a standard product and seeing a menu of options that you could choose as a customer to get additional modifications later, and then those modifications, you'd be even more happy with your product, right? In that way, the ISFP can end up building their legacy through those modifications instead of forcing their legacy on everyone else by taking their freedom of choice away, by being controlling. What's so great about Chris Knife is that she is the least controlling ISFP I have ever met. And I've known a lot of controlling ISFP women. I recently had a very controlling ISFP woman in my life. She's very subjugating, and she would constantly take my freedom of choice away because she became really frustrated that I was not taking on her value system and going along with her choices and forcing me to follow her lead, which ultimately led to the destruction of our relationship, to the point where I told her, don't talk to me again. Do not speak to me again until you get your shit together. But I also told her, by the way, because of this, and because we've done this so many times at this point, I'm going to be actively looking for an ISFP woman. And I did. I found one. I married her for good reason. And I love her with all my heart. And I am devoted to her forever. That's the power of extroverted sensing parent, folks. An extroverted sensing parent has to learn, and it does learn, it teaches NI child to be willing to submit. Submit to the expectations other people have, so that you can at least establish rapport when that initial expectation is met. And then you can say, hey, there's all these other options, there's all these other choices that you have in front of you to give you an even better experience. What do you actually want to do? Because extroverted sensing parent is then able to craft those experiences that is guided by the choices of other people around them, right? And this is how an ISFP can be insanely social and have deep, meaningful social connections with other people in their lives. And it's so fascinating to watch Chris Knife actually do this over and over and over with every person in her life. And I'll be honest, it exhausts her. Using your parent function is actually very exhausting. It's actually the most exhausting thing to do. Insanely exhausting. But it is insanely rewarding. Because by being being a bit patient and establishing a baseline rapport with your performance and meeting through extroverted sensing parent and responsibly meeting those expectations of others, slowly over time, once you have that rapport, you can actually adjust their expectations. ISFPs who commit social faux pas and lack social skills are proactively adjusting those expectations first and come in guns blazing, forcing other people to accept certain expectations. Because the ISFP wants to lazily perform with their extroverted sensing parent and assume that everyone wants things just the way that they want. That's not how it is. That's really not how it is. So based on that, learn this lesson. Learn the lesson that Chris Knife has obviously already learned. Yes, it's very exhausting. Yes, it can kind of suck. Yes, you may actually get bored producing the same thing over and over again. But then over time, once you've established that rapport with those closest to you, you then have the ability to show them by your example that, yeah, you did make the right choice. Yeah, you do have the right value system. That, yeah, you are exercising your personal freedom in such a way where it can be an example to other people that they can exercise their personal freedom pragmatically as well, instead of being at risk of living someone else's dream or living someone else's life, which oftentimes ISFPs who lack social skills find themselves in the pit, find themselves in the rut of life doing. You do not want to do this, ISFPs. You cannot do it. You cannot do that. So don't do it. Instead, find out what the people closest towards you, what their expectations are. Use your FI hero to weigh out what you can do for them versus what you can't do for them. Okay? Do not allow your NI child to think that you have unlimited carte blanche to just do whatever it is you want to do with other people. You can't always do that. Not everybody is going to accept your value system. You have to weigh it out. Work hard to perform for them, and yes, it may be exhausting. Work hard to give them the experience, but do it in such a way where you're not sacrificing your own personal value system and freedom to do so. Don't do that. But instead, what you do is that because you're giving them that good experience at the beginning, they're more likely to trust you to receive new experiences and new standards from you later, which then engages your personal creativity to improve and strengthen the people around you so that they too are enabled to adopt their own value system, so that they too are able to exercise their own personal freedom, so that they too become a part of your legacy as a body temple ISFP. And that's how you do it, folks. When you do this, you'll never be lonely. You'll never be alone. You'll never reject others, and you'll never be rejected. You'll never preemptively reject because you already know what the expectations are, and you already know what you can do versus what you can't do. Instead of assuming that you can do it all, because you don't want to find yourself as an ISFP who is using your ESFJ shadow to people please. Don't people please. But oftentimes, you find yourself in a situation where you assume that by giving them all these added modifications, for example, on a weapon system, that you are people pleasing, you are pleasing others, when the reality situation is you're not actually pleasing anybody. You're really just pleasing yourself. That's the problem. That's the problem. You have to have balance. And the only way to get balance is by utilizing your extroverted sensing parent responsibly. Okay? I'm not asking you to people please. I'm asking you to be aware of what you can and can't do. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your value system. I'm not asking you to sacrifice your personal freedom. I'm asking you all, as ISFPs, to improve your performance. Be aware of expectations other people may have and see what you can and cannot do. Which expectations you can meet, which ones you can't. You won't be able to meet everyone's expectation. And that's okay. But that doesn't mean that gives you justification to cut them out of your life either. Keep that in mind. So, anyway, folks, thanks for watching and listening, and I'll see you guys on the next episode next month for the INTPs and the INFPs for Season 12, Part 2. Thanks for watching and listening. We'll see you guys next time.